We used to work together 25 years ago.
I'll just glance over. It's easy to glance over. I can stand on this. I'll stand on this.
Your pictures are not hanging straight, and it's driving me nuts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You don't need to have one of those little machines with the bubble. You just have to look.
Yeah. That's the good thing about being like an artist and stuff is you have the eye. Whenever you need levels or anything, so you know, just
Yeah. And yet I don't like, for art, I don't like it real organized.
yes.
I have two ways of thinking about it. But when it's up on the wall, it has to be, in total, it has to be balanced.
Yes. Yep. I'm the same.
Yeah, Good evening, and welcome back to Winchester Academy's Winter-Spring 2022 series. I'm Anita Olson, and I'm a trustee of Winchester Academy. We're grateful to the city of Waupaca. And in particular, IT and Communication Media Director Josh Werner, for making this program possible by providing the space and technology to bring this program to you in multiple formats. Our next program is in 2 weeks on Monday, March 21st, when Teresa Kaminsky returns to celebrate Women's History Month with her talk, I Will Always Be Somebody, Dr. Mary Walker, The Civil War and Fight for Women's Rights. Winchester Academy's Roots of Jazz celebration will be held May 2nd through May 9th. Free tickets for the ticketed events are now available at the booksellers during their regular business hours. We'll have a question and answer session following the presentation tonight. And you can also submit questions via Facebook Live site or by telephone. We have a telephone number, 715-942-9917. I'm going to repeat that, 715-942-9917. My husband Bob and I are very happy to sponsor tonight's program. Our speakers tonight are Waupaca residents Colin and Jenny Mitchell. Jenny is currently a clinical placement coordinator for Moreland University. She has a bachelor's degree in studio art from the University of Wisconsin in Green Bay, a master's in art in teaching from Aurora University, and is currently pursuing a doctorate in educational sustainability from the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. Colin serves as a trustee of Winchester Academy. He currently teaches a master's class in the globalization of education for Moreland University and digital marketing at Rochester Institute of Technology Satellite Campus in Zagreb, Croatia. Colin earned his undergraduate degree in biology from the University of Delaware, an MBA from Pace University, and a PhD from Walden University in public health. Please join me in welcoming Colin and Jenny Mitchell.
Great. Thank you, Anita. You hear me? So today, Jenny and I, we're going to take you through a journey around the world through the eyes of international schools. We've spent the last 15 years abroad, Jenny in education, me with a combination of business and education. So we're just going to share some of our experiences. But before that, we want to give you a little bit of background information. So as an educator, as a teacher, I've taught mostly high school. So it's been biology, chemistry, and economics on the international level.
And I taught primarily elementary and also visual arts, and even got into teaching preschool swimming at one point, but mainly elementary and art.
Would you like to explain how? So something else we want to talk about before we even get started is how you find these positions in international schools. Because a lot of times when we say we're international teachers, the first thing that comes up, oh, do you teach English? And the answer is no, we teach a wide variety of subjects. And the second question is, oh, do you belong to an organization? And there are a lot of different search companies that are out there that help international teachers. There's Search Associates, there's CIS, there's Schroll. So you don't have to belong to a particular organization. There are a lot of different types of groups that are out there to help international teachers. There's different fairs that happen around the world. There's a fair here in the US, there are fairs in the Middle East, there are fairs in Europe and Asia. So anyone with a US teaching license is able to pursue an international teaching position. So what I want to do is talk about this a little bit. Starting over in Colombia, this is where Jenny began her trip in education. And then from there, she moved to Morocco in the middle. Next to Morocco, you have Tunisia, and that's where we met. We met actually at an educational conference in Tunis. And well, Jenny was in Morocco, I was in France. And then after Morocco, Jenny moved to Singapore, which was great because then I had the opportunity to actually visit Singapore and travel around that part of the world and see her. And then she says, well, if we're going to continue dating, we should live on the same continent. And I was like, well, I guess that's how these things work. So then Jenny got a job in Germany. And this is where I changed careers and went from corporate into education. I followed her to Germany, left my corporate job, got my teaching license, and then began my educational career in Germany. And then from there, we went to Sudan, and then Croatia, and now we're back in the States for a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to stop in most of these places. We'll talk about our experiences within these countries and within these regions. So I want to put this up first. This is Tunisia, kind of give you an idea of where that is, what part of the world, how close that is to Europe, right? We're at the northern part of Africa. And then move into, how do we define international schools? So the first part is students. Do the students need to be international or can they be local? The second part is teachers. Do the teachers have to be international or expats or can they be local teachers? Language. Do you have to teach in English to be an international school? Right? And are you serving an expat elite or a local elite student body, right? And does it have to be profit or for-profit or non-profit? And then finally, when you look at the different types of international schools and curricula that are out there, the main ones are the UK, the British, and then you have the US, and all those flags represent an international curriculum that's out there. And then I have France out as well. France, the French have a lot of bilingual schools or French schools that are out there. Not as many as I would say as the US, the Brits, or international, but a fair number. And when you look at the curriculum, obviously the British will have a British curriculum. It's called Cambridge. And we might mention that tonight. With the US, obviously American curriculum, I might mention the AP, the Advanced Placement. International, we're going to talk about the IB, or the International Baccalaureate. So how do we define international schools? It's all of the above, right? You can have an international school that has 100% local students, that has an international curriculum and international teachers, and that will fall into that category. Or you can have a very diverse student population. Some schools cap their local population at 25, 30%, and then you have expats on that. And then you're probably running an international curriculum and you have international teachers. So you can have a lot of different types of international schools. And what that comes down to is you have thousands of international schools worldwide. And if you think of international schools as private schools that serve a specific clientele, that's kind of the international schools that we've worked with. We're not talking about the Department of Defense schools, which are abroad as well, but we're looking at your private international schools. So having said that, I just put up some keywords just in case. You'll hear about the IB, the International Baccalaureate. That's the international program. You'll have the Cambridge or IGCSE at the high school. That's the British program. And then I might mention AP or Advanced Placement, since I work primarily with high school. And that would be the American piece. And then I'll hand it over to Jenny to talk about some of her experiences.
All right, so I let him do the introduction and I'll kick off some of the stories here. So Colombia, this was my first post about 15, 17 years ago. And when I had gone into the job fair, actually, they had given us a list of schools that were going to be at the job fair, and I had taken that list and I took a Sharpie and I crossed off Colombia. I was not going to go to Colombia. You know, you hear so many things about Colombia. Well, I was relatively young at the time and a little bit overwhelmed with how the job fair was going. Everyone's, talking to each other in this massive gymnasium at the University of Northern Iowa. And I look over and there's this woman smiling at this gorgeous table with all these artifacts and the Colombian flag. And I went over and I started talking to her, and we noticed we had the same necklace on. And turns out she said, well, just come for an interview. Let's talk about the school. And I did. I went to the interview and we hit it off. Sounded like a great school. I ended up in Colombia. So that was my first post, and it was quite nice actually because they flew us all down to Miami for an orientation first. So we got to get to know everybody, and then we flew over together. And it's always nice your first, major move abroad to have someone at the airport holding your hand and going through the visa process and things. So I was on the northern tip of the country in Barranquilla, and this was it's a port city. It's an industrial city, but also right on the Caribbean. So that was very nice. Here's some pictures of the school. And the school was an American school. The population was a majority Colombian. The other thing that happens in international schools too is you have a lot of families who are dual nationality, or in this case, a lot of the Colombians, they would go have their babies in the U.S., so they were also American citizens too. And the families that we served were mainly governmental, in politics and government and international businesses. And the languages we taught in English, but they also had a couple classes in Spanish as well. Interesting story here is I had said before how I was a little bit nervous to move to Colombia, and I can remember my first day working in my classroom, setting up my classroom, and our classrooms led to the outside. And one of the guards walks by and was carrying a gun. So it was one of those kind of eye-opening kinds of things, and our school had fence around it as well because the kids we served were part of the government, and they needed to be protected. So our kids had drivers and things like that. So it was a really interesting kind of other perspective of what you hear from the country. Oh, and I wanted to say as well, it's a little bit blurry. It was before the age of smartphones and great cameras, but this is an iguana that came into my room. As I mentioned, the door led to the outside, and we had lots and lots of iguanas that lived on the campus, and the kids would get really annoyed because they couldn't play soccer because all the iguanas were grazing like cattle in the field. But we would often, if my door wasn't closed tightly, we would often get wildlife. So the experience was quite, as you kind of envision South America to be in some of these cities. One really neat thing that I was able to do was join a Cumbiyamba, which is a dance group, and dance in the carnival, which is actually the second largest in South America. And the interesting part was that when I had taken the job at the school, the director had assured me that it would be okay that I didn't speak Spanish. it wasn't really okay that I didn't speak Spanish because nobody there spoke English. But I was brave. I joined the dance group. I really wanted to have a part of this, and learned how to dance even though nobody had told me in English. Did everything with just by signs, I guess. The other thing that was really interesting that I learned very quickly, my first move abroad, is that safety and waivers don't really exist. So this was an interesting trip we took where it's Parque Tayrona, which is Tayrona National Park, and the bus will drop you off at the entrance to the park, and you have to hike through the rainforest. It's a 3-hour hike, and to get to this you can see the little shop and restaurant here, and there's a family that lives there, and they're your hosts, and you sleep in hammocks on the beach, and it's great and it's beautiful. But if something happens, it's hard to get out. Boats aren't allowed. It's a national park, so boats aren't allowed to come in either. So you have to pack everything in your backpack that you would need for that trip. Well, it's the rainforest, and you have some really interesting creatures in the rainforest. So it's a picture of one of the large carnivorous centipedes. That's my foot. It wasn't alive at the time, so it was safe. But also, at one point too, because it had been heavy rains, we had to hike barefoot because of the mud was so deep, and ended up stepping on some leafcutter ants. So I don't know if you know much about leafcutter ants, but it was not a pleasant experience at all. So it just kind of made me aware that, in other countries too, there isn't someone protecting you at all times. You really are out for yourselves and making sure that, you protect yourself. And then finally, the summer between, usually the contracts are for 2 years, so the summer between my first and second year, went to Guatemala, spent a summer at a Spanish center, and I learned Spanish, which I speak very well with a Colombian accent. So the takeaway for me, and I won't always be talking for all of these, but the takeaway for me was the whole idea of the mañana attitude. So when I moved there, I was just coming from the US. I was a perfectionist. I was always really organized. I liked things done, and it just doesn't happen that way when you're there. This is a picture of an arroyo, and these are when you have heavy rainstorms, it actually floods the city. So the city is like a bowl, and all the water goes into the city, and sometimes you have to wait 3 to 4 hours for the water to clear before you can go anywhere because they're quite dangerous. So people are killed in them often. So just kind of learning patience, learning that, if your refrigerator is broken, you're just going to have to shop in a couple of days because it might not be fixed. And it was a really good lesson for me to learn because it helped me to relax in a lot of ways.
Great. I could take this one. So this is where I met Jenny in Germany. And as you can see, we were in Bonn, Germany. And this is kind of where Bonn is. You can see right near Cologne, not too far away from Frankfurt. And what you'll notice is we're going to be right on the Rhine River. So this is the school that we worked at. And like I said, there's the Rhine right in the back. It was beautiful, right? If you know anything about Germany in this region, it's just full of castles. And the Germans are super friendly. The school we worked at was an IB school, international population. And what we have here, there was a lot of political ambassador children. The UN, basically it's a UN school because the UN was in Bonn. The main languages were English and German. The school was in English, but there's German everywhere else. So a lot of the students were bilingual, if not trilingual. Speaking English because of school, Germany because you're in Germany, and whatever their mother tongue was. And the funny thing is, with the UN school, we had about 80, I'd say 75 to 80 different nationalities within that school, which is pretty amazing for learning, because you learn, you have so many different perspectives. So with the experience, like I said, this is a region, that's a castle that was in our region. Oh yeah, and the other picture there with the vineyards. So around the same time as Oktoberfest, our little region has a wine hiking event. So you're able to hike, we hiked, 6 hours or something that day. you're able to hike from like little village to little village, and they have these little wine stops. And you can stop and have a little glass of wine as you keep going, you hike. And it culminates into this big festival at the end. So I'm going to call it Wine Fest, is what it was. So it was an amazing experience. People were really friendly. The Germans, they are very strict, as you would imagine. But when it's time so they work hard and they party hard, which is amazing to see. So when it's like Carnival and things like that, the Germans really let their hair down. Where we lived is Schwanheim in a town called Bad Godesberg. So Schwanheim means pig home of the pigs. Nice little quaint town. This is a restaurant that was right down the street from us. And then in Bad Godesberg, which is the center, it's nice. You come home, you have a market that's right down there. For Oktoberfest, you have little tents out. So all year round, there's something going on. And also, Bad Godesberg is the home of Haribo, who just moved to Wisconsin. So, funny connection there.
And I would add, too, that part of the lesson, I think, in Germany was when we moved to Germany, I was a little bit nervous about the taxes because you hear about the taxes and the social charges and how high they are. And it was a huge realization about how we really got a lot out of that. Our quality of life was very, very good in Germany. And it was also because they had very strict work-life balance. Even our school didn't allow us to come in on the weekends as teachers. And tell a teacher you can't go in on the weekend. That takes a long time to adjust to. So it was just a really good lesson also to think about, hey, you know what? There's more to life outside of what we're doing here at school.
Nice.
Hey, Morocco. So this was after Colombia. I went over then to Morocco. And I was in Casablanca, which you probably have heard of quite often because of the movie. So again, right on the coast. The school was just north of the city in a very green area. It was an American school. Majority of the population were local Moroccans from international businesses, big businesses there. A lot of the companies, too, with these international schools pay for their kids to go to school. So even though oftentimes the tuition's about $20,000 a year, the companies, when they bring people in, will pay the tuition for these schools. And the language of the school was English. In Morocco is also French and Arabic. So the kids had classes in French and Arabic as well. The really amazing thing about Morocco, which I learned when I went there, is the landscape is incredible. And I don't know if anyone has been there before, but you have the coast, you have the ocean and the sea, you have the mountains. So picture hiking in the mountains. And then you have the desert, which is what you normally think of when you think about Morocco. And also just the ancient history of the country is quite incredible. So this is a picture of actually a tannery where they were dyeing the leather. And it smelled bad. They actually gave you little mint leaves that you would put inside your nose so that you could tolerate being inside this place, and they called it their Chanel number 5. So Morocco, you probably connect to the desert. So it was really easy to get around in Morocco. People are incredibly friendly. So we took some trips out into the desert. There's a Casbah. Of course, riding camels and spending a night in the oasis and meeting some of the nomadic tribes, too, that would come. Well, this actually is not a picture of Morocco. These are pictures of Egypt. But when I was in Morocco, I think the biggest thing that I learned from being there was tied to the Arab Spring. So during my time there was the time of the Arab Spring and all the uprisings. And some friends and I had booked a trip to Egypt before the revolution. Well, the Egyptian revolution happened. Some friends canceled. A couple of friends and I decided we're not going to cancel. We're just going to wait. We were actually one of the first tourists back in Egypt. And it was interesting because being in the square, going back to the Egyptian Museum, you have BBC there, you have all the big news stations, and they're interviewing us, because it's big to get get tourists back. This is actually a picture of the Valley of the Kings and the Hatshepsut's tomb. And if you look at these pictures during a normal season, it's full of people. When we were there, there was no one because of the revolution. Egypt relies heavily, heavily on tourism. So when things like the revolution happen, when war happens in a lot of these places, it hurts the people dramatically. What we didn't realize, too, was how much money we would need for tips. So usually you give tips to the guards of the tombs, and we ran out quite quickly and luckily had gum and mechanical pencils and things to give to these guards because it was maybe all that they had gotten that day. And it sounds trivial, but it was big. So going back to just kind of feeling like we did our part and making you realize, too, that not everything is what you see on the news. Okay, I'll start Singapore. Singapore, Southeast Asia. The school. Singapore has a lot of money. The curriculum of the school was IB, very international, again, similar to Germany, a very international population. And you have a lot of banks in Singapore. You have a lot of big business in Singapore. You have a lot of wealthy families there. And also, so we had a lot of international families, but also Singaporean families. The language of the school was English, but the kids also learned Mandarin, but they also had French and German and classes. But like most schools, especially in the IB, they want kids to be bilingual. The experience, well, Singapore, I would highly recommend visiting. It's a really fascinating country. It has, they've built so much on this little island. These are the Botanical Gardens. Definitely worth a visit. You can't tell how big they are in this picture, but they're massive. And also the flora and fauna is pretty incredible being in Southeast Asia. And I just put this picture up there too, another cultural experience, my first real ice cream sandwich. So what happened at the side of the road is the man had the giant chunk of ice cream and would cut off a block, put it in a slice of bread and give it to you. Actually quite good, you don't think so. And do you want to talk about?
Keep going.
In our time in Southeast Asia, so the interesting thing about being in Singapore is it's incredibly expensive, and I'll let Colin tell that story in just a moment. So it was actually cheaper for when Colin would come visit, it was cheaper for us to fly out of the country for a weekend than to stay there and go out to dinner and things. So we would often fly to Vietnam or Thailand or somewhere nearby, and we took did a lot of tours and trips, and this was an interesting one we had done in Vietnam, where we went into the countryside and we got to meet a family that was living in the countryside. They had their own little, distillery maybe, brewery, how they made the money, but this was the home that they lived in. But even more interesting was this was the bomb shelter that they still had in their house from the Vietnam War. So we got to hear her story of the Vietnam War, and was just an interesting take on hearing different perspectives, and also like realizing how as a global community we're all, one people. Do you want to tell the story?
Yeah, well, you can tell this story.
Okay, I'll finish with this one. So this is a picture of the harbor in Singapore, and that's the art museum in the foreground. Singapore, being from the Midwest, being from Wisconsin, one of the most endearing and amazing things about being from Wisconsin are the people. And just being able to walk in somewhere and talk to people and get to know people and just the welcoming invitation. It was a little bit of a culture shock for me going into a place like Singapore because it wasn't like that. So I would go to the same place over and over again, and I still wouldn't be recognized or greeted as if I would be here in the Midwest. There was an interesting thing happening at the time I was in Singapore, is smartphones were now becoming a big thing, and people were on their smartphones all the time. So Singapore, the government started an initiative where they were trying to get people to talk to each other again and create like a community again. The birth rate was going down. And I'm not saying it's just because of smartphones, but because of a lot of reasons was going down. So it was in places around Singapore, you would actually see signs about how to, talk to somebody, how these initiatives for making friends, which is something I'd never considered when Colin and I would come back in the summers. We talk to everybody at the grocery store because it's what you do. But it wasn't, it's a very different individualistic versus collective culture. It was an interesting lesson to learn.
So just to expand on that, so when you went to like the subway, there's a sign up there. It says, first you make eye contact, then you say hello, right? So we have these public service announcements on how to make friends. My favorite part of Singapore, like I said, Jenny was there. For me, I'm back in Europe, I'm working. But since I'm working business development, sometimes I have to go visit clients, other times I'm working from home like everybody's doing today. So what I would do is just pack up my office, hop on a plane, go visit Jenny in Singapore, and just change the office location and just work from there, which is fantastic. My first time going in, though, I get through, before I get to customs, you have to walk through the airport, and then customs is down below this escalator. And there's a huge line that's backed up. And I'm thinking, I'm going to be here forever because I'm a foreigner going into this country. Nope, best airport experience I've ever had. You get there, there must be 30 people in front of you. But in Singapore, they stamp your passport, they say, welcome to Singapore, and give you a little piece of candy as you walk through. And it was like a machine. So just within, I won't say minutes, but it was super fast and efficient. And then, of course, I got to see Jenny, which was a bonus. So the next place, this is where I really started teaching. This is where I taught biology in Sudan, in Khartoum. So you can see there, Sudan, with the northern part of Sudan, a lot of desert. If I can zoom in a little bit, that's where Khartoum is. And where Khartoum is, that's where the two Niles meet, so the blue and the white Nile. But it's still a desert, right? So if you're outside of that Nile, there's really, it's only sand, right? So you'll have some plants and some growth along the Nile. But for the most part, it is desert, and you'll see that. This is the school that we worked at. Nice school. And again, like I said, we're catering to the elite, right? So it's the the ambassador kids that are coming in. It's the locals who have the money, who can afford this school. The school was actually built to support one of the local company's employees and family members. And that's how the school was established. It's an IB curriculum, international curriculum, again. Definitely an international population. I think we had 50 different nationalities, and they're mostly Sudanese, obviously. We served a lot of NGOs, again, political, affluent Sudanese, and different businesses. The language at the school was English, but obviously the language in Sudan was Arabic. So again, you're getting bilingual and trilingual students. So the experience, so this is what you can see. So the reason why we put these pictures up is to get an idea of what Sudan looks like. So if you look at the picture from the airplane, you can see the roads. If you can see that clearly, it is desert, right? It is sand. And that's what most of the roads were like that out there. Every once in a while, you do have paved roads, but within Sudan itself, in Khartoum, you're not going to have street signs. You're not going to really have street numbers. There is no postal service. It's kind of like, okay, if you're going to find something, then someone says, you go out here, you find this building, you make a left, and you find that building, and you make a right, and then hopefully you'll get there. Anything to add to that?
I did all the driving, by the way.
It's true. and the reason for that, though, is because there are no lines in the road. When you get to a traffic light, you might make a right on red, you might make a left on red, you might go straight on red. Who knows? It was one of those environments where there were no, there were rules, but no one really followed the rules if you had to get somewhere. So Jenny felt safer if she was driving rather than if I was driving, which is fair enough.
So I do want to add too, when you go into these international schools, they give you various packages. So of course your salary, but depending on where you go, it's classified as a hardship post or maybe not a hardship post. Obviously in Germany, not a hardship post. You get a salary and then you're on your own. Going into Sudan was a hardship post. So we were given a car to use while we were there. All of our health insurance was covered. We had evacuation flights if we needed them. They paid for us to fly home once a year. Trying to think, different bonuses and incentives for going to places like this. So that's one reason why teachers also move around the world too, kind of depending on what you wanted. And going into a place like Sudan, where a school takes care of you, is really nice because you land, you get in, they've cooked dinner for you, it's in your apartment is paid for, you don't have to worry about bills or anything like that. You know, they take care of you. Whereas in a place like Germany, you are on your own with a lot of those things.
Yeah, and to build on that, and I can't remember if this was the American school there, but certain businesses would tell Americans not to bring their kids, right? You're coming into Sudan. At this time, it was controlled by a dictator, right? This was before the upheaval. And we left, what, a year or two before that happened. So it was. I mean, the people were friendly. It was, I'd say, a relatively safe city, except for the chaotic driving. But again, it was ruled by a dictator. So something interesting is you could not just go out and take pictures anywhere. You had to have a photo permit. So you actually had to go somewhere, get a permit with your ID on it in order to take any type of pictures. And it was obviously illegal to take any pictures of bridges or government buildings, anything with the strategic impact. And it is one of those countries where your social media is being checked by the government that you think, right? You have to be very, very careful what you do. So there weren't a lot of posts coming out of Sudan, not a lot of social media coming out of Sudan, just because you're in a foreign country and you have to follow their rules. But when you left, let's say the city, there were checkpoints. So you had to have a travel permit as well. So when you were leaving the city, you had to show them that, okay, you're okay to leave the city, and then you move on to the next checkpoint, which kind of ties into some of these pictures coming up. So again, this one just shows the streets, what it was like. It is desert. And leads into this. So when we went to the pyramids in Merowe, which are supposedly older than the pyramids in Egypt, there were a lot of different checkpoints that we had to go through in order to get to the pyramids.
It was also extremely hot. So I had a candle out. I was going to put this picture up and I didn't. I had a candle out on our terrace and it melted. So even you could go out at 3 o'clock in the morning, because that's when a lot of the life happened, was at night, because the sun was down, and you could be out at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning in a t-shirt and shorts and still be sweating. It wasn't like other desert areas that got quite cold at night. It was hot all the time. Just to give you a little bit of a reference, it was in the winter time, it was a little bit cooler. I think it was somewhere between 78 and 80 degrees. And we got to school and I walked up to the gate of the school and our school guard was wearing a winter coat and a winter hat. But we did have some fun. So we went camping at the pyramids in Merowe, and this was another camping area, I should say, along the Nile where we could go and camp and do some fishing, and there were some goats and things.
Well, there's also scorpions, and the scorpions you couldn't see. You needed a black light to see the scorpions. They glowed in the dark. So you would not be able to see them if you stepped on them. But you needed a black light to see them. That was interesting. I'm not going to play this, but if you go into the next slide. So there's a video out there, and I think I must have gotten at least 1,000 hits, or at least Jenny did, because Jenny posted it. But we took a picture of the sandstorm coming in from our apartment. And it's an 8-minute video. Like I said, I'm not going to play it. But this kind of gives you an idea of what it looked like from one perspective coming in. And if I had the video going, you could look down. You see people, in their cars just driving around and walking the streets and not knowing what's about to hit them. You can see it's like slowly rolling over the city. It was pretty impressive. See if I can hit the next one. And that's just it's just getting closer and closer and closer. And Yeah, so for me, I've never seen one before, so I thought that was pretty neat. And the takeaway?
So as you can imagine, Sudan, a lot of poverty. So when the Sudanese war happened and South Sudan broke away from Sudan or North Sudan, they lost also a lot of their resources. And South Sudan is still in a lot of turmoil. The interesting thing was that we got a lot of refugees actually in Khartoum. So even though a city with a lot of poverty, we had a lot of South Sudanese, and we had a lot of families that built houses outside of our apartment building. This was a family, I think there were 6 kids in the family, and it was just really, I guess, eye-opening too, because what the things we valued in Sudan was making sure that we had clean water. You know, we had to boil everything. We had to wash all of our fruits and vegetables. We didn't eat at a lot of restaurants just because of, for safety, but just really also made us appreciate just really simple, clean food, clean water, being able to get on a plane and leave, if we needed to. Sudan has an interesting arrangement with the U.S., and I'm not sure if it's still the same, but it's a lottery. So if you're wealthy enough to put your name in the hat to get the lottery, you can come to the U.S. and they will give you a visa, but they only give a certain amount each year. So some of the people we knew, the local Sudanese, they would also save money so that because they had to have money when they came here, so that they could try to get into this lottery system and come over into the U.S.
And the last thing I want to say with this, when Jenny said about the safety, we had teachers who got dengue or dengue fever, malaria, and other diseases just because it's in the water, it's in the air. So you do have to be very, very careful of where you go when you go out. Dead.
And Croatia. This was our last stop for now. So we were in Zagreb, which is the capital. And our school, this is the new campus. Our old campus was in an old military hospital up in the mountains. We moved across the river. This was the new campus. It was American and IB. So we had an American curriculum all the way up through high school, and then they went into the IB. International population, also, I think about 30% Croatian. Same as usual, international businesses, government, and languages were English and Croatian. It's Croatia. It was fantastic. It was amazing. It was beautiful. This is Dubrovnik on the coast. Croatia is a country where you can go anywhere and see similar to Morocco, all sorts of different landscapes. So this was a photo I had taken at Plitvice National Park, which is the park of waterfalls, and you can see the fish just in the water, crystal clear. All the water there is just stunning. So definitely a lot of amazing adventures to have in Croatia. And we also had the opportunity to travel around the region at that time. This is Sarajevo, Bosnia. A really, really amazing place. And the amazing thing about Sarajevo is that it has so much history. So you have part of the city that is from the ancient, the Ottoman Empire. You have part of the city is from when the Europeans came in. You have part of the city is, you have mosques, you have Orthodox, you have temples, you have all these religions within one block sometimes. And it was the Bosnian people, incredible. It was really interesting talking to one of our walking guides at the time, because he was mentioning how he actually missed Tito and he missed the communism, and which is something we had never considered of thinking about. But he said, yes, because everybody was taken care of at the time. Everybody had a place to live. Everybody knew, everybody had the same things. But he said it wasn't like it is now, where we have capitalism coming in and some people have more than others. And it was just a really interesting perspective to hear, which we had never heard before. The other interesting part, so here we're in the mountains around Sarajevo. And of course, you probably remember the Bosnian War. So we learned a lot about the siege that happened in Sarajevo, and about where people were stationed and what happened on the turn of events. But what was incredible is how forgiving the Bosnian people have been, and how open they were to, countless times we heard from our guides about how we just want everybody to be together again. It doesn't matter the religion, because you have, the different religions that were really battling. And that was an interesting lesson in that region too, because you have the Croatians, you have the Slovenians, the Serbs, and you have all of these different perspectives, and a lot of it is about religion. So that was quite interesting. This actually on the left there was a tunnel that Americans in other countries, it was close to the mountains, where they would actually go under, and it would go under the airport, and it would deliver supplies to the people in Sarajevo during the siege. And another interesting thing, so if you walk around the streets of Sarajevo, you'll see what's called the Sarajevo Rose, and it's where the shells hit the concrete. And what they've done is they've kept them there as a reminder of the horrors of war, and they don't want to ever get into something like that again, and just kind of a reminder of everybody coming together. And we drove there because it's easy to drive when you're in that region. I think Colin drove maybe that time. But you can still see, and this was a common sight all along the way back to Croatia. And even in Croatia, you could see where buildings were still destroyed, people had built next to them, but still a lot of war to be seen.
Good. So we brought a couple of artifacts. This is one of them. This is from Sarajevo. This is a 22 millimeter shell. So what they've done is, with all the shell casings from the war, they started decorating some of these, making art pieces out of them. So when you go into different stores, you can actually see a lot of these different types of shell casings, different sizes, obviously, from small bullets to ones that are bigger than this, that they've actually made decorative pieces. So I'll hand this out to you guys to take a look at. This is something that we brought back. So final thoughts and questions. So I guess my final thought is this. We've had a great time traveling. I've met a lot of different people, different experiences. I always enjoy coming back home, though, right? I mean, some of the experiences are fantastic, others maybe not so much, but I always enjoy coming back to the States. You?
Thank you very much. I'm going to repeat the phone number for those who are at home. If you have any questions for Colin and Jenny, that number is 715-942-9917. And I'm going to open it up for questions from our studio audience. Step up to a mic, please.
Oh, here you go. I think that works.
Thank you. I assume, is this working?
It is.
Okay. I assume that the B in IB is for baccalaureate. Would you talk a little bit about what the baccalaureate schools are?
Yeah, so the IB schools, the International Baccalaureate, is based, you have the primary program, you have the middle years program, and you have the DP, the diploma program. So the DP is the last 2 years. The DP is more, I would say, similar to AP, what we would have here, almost college level courses. And it's designed so that kids, no matter what country you're in, colleges understand what you can do and what you've learned, because you take exams at the end. The MYP is very much based around like conceptual learning, and then the PYP is very much based around inquiry. So kind of a combination of like an American curriculum and like a Montessori is the best way to explain it. So it's very open-ended, a lot of project-based learning, but the goal is at the end. If you're coming from an IB school, you'll have a certain amount of credits, you'll take these exams, and if you want to go to school in Germany, the UK, the US, they'll understand what you've taken. It's like a common language, I guess.
So you're basically prepared for university
Yes.
in IB
Yeah.
school.
I would say a majority of the families, 99.9%, expect that their kids will go to university when they graduate.
Do you find that most of the students are in these schools for most of their life, or are they moving around as much as the teachers?
Both. Some, I would say maybe of all my classes, I would have maybe 1 in 3, 1 in 4 students would go there from K to 12, but the rest of them moved around. And that was the great thing, because we would have a new student, and within hours, that student was friends with everyone in the class. It was just really easy. They'd all been through it before, so they understood.
Yeah. Oh,
I wanted to ask if teenagers are teenagers everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere in the world, right? Yeah, yeah. Whether no matter what continent you're on, what country you're in, yeah, teenagers are teenagers. That's 100% correct.
and I have a question here from Texas tonight, and it's similar to the one that was just asked. Did you see different impressions of the students you were teaching from different countries or different cultural backgrounds and things, or was that fairly similar?
That's an excellent question. A lot of the students who move around from country to country, we call them third culture kids. And they kind of develop their own culture. So I would say third culture kids have their own culture no matter where they are in the world. They understand that they're going to be picking up maybe a year or two from now, going into an unknown environment, and they're going to have to make friends. But you do have your local students within these schools. So the Croatians tend to be Croatians, Sunnis tend to be Sunnis, Germans tend to be German, but with an international outlook, right? So with these international schools, it's all about international mindedness, cultural competency, increasing your cultural intelligence, becoming citizens of the world. So in that perspective, each culture may be a little bit different, but they all have that international perspective.
And I would say, too, that depending on the country you're in, they all have a different outlook on education in general. So there were times where we would be in places and the parents felt like they were paying a lot of money for the kids to go to the school, so the responsibility was on the teachers. Whereas other places, the kids would come to school wanting to learn. So there was definitely a huge cultural component, and that was a struggle. As teachers, you go in and you want to make a difference, and you want to do the curriculum, and you want to do everything right, but you also have to understand the culture, your host country's culture too, in which we are living.
Yeah, and what's unique about the students is, in the U.S., you have your athletes, you have your music group, you have different groups of students who kind of hang out separately. And your 9th graders won't hang out with your 10th graders, right? Your 10th graders won't hang out with 11th graders. Everybody kind of stays within their grade level. International schools, it's totally different. You'll have 9th graders with 10th and 11th graders just because based on experience, based on interest. And a lot of times, a lot of these schools are going to be smaller. And you have a lot more mixing, I find, a lot more community than some of the other schools.
You just touched on religion towards the end. Are there differences? Is there prayer in school, or like in Muslim countries, they have the time during the day when they do their fixed prayers? Did you?
Yeah.
Could you just touch on that a little?
For definitely during Ramadan, if in Morocco and both Sudan, we had kids who would practice fasting and things like that. So they would be excused from PE, or when I was in Morocco, the assistants in our school would be able to go up and take a nap in the afternoon. So depending on religion, I would say the accommodations are made wherever you are. But that was the other beautiful thing about the international schools. Rather than not practicing anything, we practiced everything. So we celebrated all holidays, and we acknowledged, in Morocco, we acknowledged Christmas, and the school might not have off for all of the holidays, but I mean, we even did Thanksgiving in my classes. So it was really nice for the kids to learn everything, religion and holiday-wise.
How much time would you usually get between gigs? I mean, do you choose that yourself based on what you put yourself out there for contracts, or?
So your typical teaching contract is 2 years. So you're going to a school, it's a 2-year contract, and then you have the option of signing on for an additional year or moving. Schools try to keep their teachers on. A lot of times they'll offer an incentive or a bonus for that 3rd year. But a lot of teachers, especially young teachers coming out, they want to see the world, right? So you do that 2 years and you go to a different country, different experience. And then with administrators, it's usually a 3-year contract that you're locked into. And then again, you can actually extend that contract and move on.
So we would usually come home in June,
Yep.
pack our suitcases for whatever we needed for the next one, stay home for 2 months, and then head off. Yeah.
I was just wondering, when you're going from country to country, is there an orientation information time from your school that you're contracted with, so you understand the culture and you understand the people where you're headed?
It's a good question. We had it a little bit. Yeah, we had some schools did it more than others, but I think it's something that would be better. I think all schools should do it better.
Yeah. So yeah, not all schools do that. And I think a lot of the rationales, not all schools do that, but if you move into a country, let's say Germany, where I'd say it's an easy move, maybe there's going to be less support. But you do need that support because everything's done in German, obviously. You're going into Sudan, a place like that, you're definitely going to need someone to help you out. But like Jenny said, it's not all schools offer it, and there are different levels of support coming in. Yeah.
Just a couple of comments. You mentioned earlier that I think it was in Sarajevo, but maybe in Zagreb, about how the communist previously had ruled under Tito or whoever. We presently have a son and a daughter-in-law living in Bulgaria, which was also part of the Eastern Bloc, and just had an election recently in which a very strong affiliation with the communists didn't win, but was very close to winning. And the comment there, too, was very similar to what you said. People believed under the old regime that economically, actually, they may have been better off, and security-wise as well. Which is, as you say, sort of surprising. But it reminds us that though our democracy, which we believe in, is sort of messy at times, we still think it's the way to go. That isn't true necessarily worldwide. We have this kind of idea that everybody wants to be like us, and I'm sure you found out that's not always the case. So just to comment on that, that's still pretty much a rule of thumb in terms of other countries around the world.
Yeah, I mean that's an excellent point, and you're right. I've met people in Croatia, and they're usually older, who had another job. Maybe they were accountants, and then things have changed, and they were pushed out of their job because of capitalism. And then they were like, oh, yeah, I prefer a communist regime because then everyone was equal. I had my work, I know what I was making, I was taken care of. Right, 100%.
I'm just troubled because, I mean, these schools are beautiful. And I know that the general population of these countries, that they aren't going to those schools. And are we building a real, like, monster?
Yeah,
thing?
I would say that the kids who go to these schools definitely grow up in a bubble, and they don't often realize what's outside their front door. But I think that's changing as well. I think it's getting better. In Sudan, I was part of a teacher training program. So I went into some of the local schools to help train the teachers on best practices and how to do that. Our kids get involved also in some of the projects outside. Sometimes they have like sister classrooms or things like that. It can be a lot better. I think it's improving. But I guess the idea a lot of times in these places too is that a lot of these kids are going to be leaders of the country regardless of anything because of the affiliation they have with their families. So it's to hopefully train them to make smart decisions when they get into these leadership positions to hopefully advance the country, make it better.
Do you have a sense of how many students worldwide are enrolled in international schools?
450,000. But again, it's how you classify international schools. Right?
So, for example, in China, which is not the case anymore because Chinese law has changed this since then, but in China for a long time, schools would start up and they would call themselves international schools because that's what the parents wanted. So regardless, it could have been a full Chinese school, Chinese teachers, kids from China, but they would call themselves an international school. So it's just a really fine line to determine true international schools or not, because right now the numbers are astronomical.
True, and if you look at the IB, some schools will offer one IB class. So let's say it's an IB math class. Do you consider that school to be international, right? And that's where that gray area is. For me, I think you need a little bit more than just one IB class or one international class to be considered international, but that's why you have to kind of weed through those numbers. And like Jenny said, there's different programs and curricula out there who will say, we have 10,000 schools, we have 5,000 schools, but which is great. But is it for marketing or other purposes?
Well, let's just be clear here. IB classes can be taught in Wisconsin.
Yep,
Many of the
100%.
schools here in Wisconsin teach IB classes. But basically, what BACA teaches advanced placement, AP, and CAP courses. But IB follows a similar plan or a path, and that is sort of an advanced course to try to get kids college ready and so forth. So IB is not unfamiliar to local people.
Yeah, I think in Green Lake there's a full IB school in Green Lake. Yeah.
Well, I think we've pretty much answered all the questions that are out there. Thank you very much. What? Oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. We've got plenty of time.
My question is more of on a personal note. So when or are you planning on going back to teaching in an international school at some point?
Yes.
And is this microphone working?
Yes. Yeah, we have two little ones, so we were thinking of staying here until they're about school age, and then maybe heading back out. Things change, but we do miss our international lifestyle, and right now we have a really nice balance of that, and then obviously being here in Wapaka too.
Okay. Thank you very much.